Hey you! Welcome to Simply Worldbuilding. This episode we're going to be continuing with our discussions on filling out the map. So I was discussing with you a little bit that I had kind of an idea for this little area right here. So we have big monsters.
We got big monsters.
We have huge big boys. I thought it would be sort of interesting. It was kind of taking a little bit of inspiration from the Lord of the Rings Shire a little bit, and having an area specifically dedicated to small things.
Okay, yeah.
The idea sort of sprouted into my head, once we had made the idea of the Shire, and just like a very safe, very hilly, very nice place to live. And what popped into my brain immediately was small people, like in your halflings, your hobbits, gnomes and such. And I thought it would be kind of funny if there was this area that was kind of just cut off from the world in a way that made it safe. And so the sort of evolutionary demand to get bigger and bigger kind of just doesn't exist there.
Yeah, I like the idea that this area here that is nestled in between the mountains, of being sort of detached in like a positive way, where they're, like you said, safer and just have more time to focus on, their crafts or the arts or themselves, rather than needing necessarily to worry about defense or something like that, because they're relatively defended from outside threats, and that includes other nations as well. So they can, if they can sustain themselves, then really they're kind of unbothered with what the rest of the world is dealing with or putting out for threats.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think it'll be cool to have that. One for a couple of reasons. One, it gives us a place to put like an origin of the sort of small type like races in, again, sort of a D&D think sort of way. You could also, what could be interesting is adding, I picture in the realm of also small things, like a lot of like other sort of fey creatures as well. Like it could be a relatively like magical, whimsical place.
Yeah, totally.
You might see a lot more like gnomes and like fairies and stuff like that.
I feel like we had mentioned this somewhere back, maybe episode 1 or something like that, of the idea of how stories and fairy tales and stuff like that often come from something real or imagined but long time ago, and then sort of morph into these things that kind of blend with your everyday life. And that you've got kind of the German perspective on that, where there's a lot of cautionary tales and scary things to kind of maybe keep your children in line or something like that. But we can kind of have the opposite in this area, where you get the things like the fairy that lives in the shoe or whatever, like that kind of whimsical sort of style of tales, because they have maybe less threats that they need to keep their children safe from or whatever, so they're able to focus on sort of that positive spin on things.
Totally. And I sort of, so I like, that was an idea I had just to nail down on sort of this place. And I think it would be funny to have a place that contrasts with the rest of the world dealing with sort of giant creatures in one way or another, and just have this small little area that for whatever reason just completely contrasts that, especially with us making this like sort of a deadly swamp area, and then having this right beside it as well, just over yonder. I think is just kind of a funny contrast. It might not necessarily make the most sense geographically, but the whole point of this sort of little mountain protection here is that it's protecting them. And so this isn't going to be necessarily a huge threat.
Elevation-wise, the area over here, the swampy zone, is very low, like to sea level, and water sort of pools in like a nasty, stagnant way. Whereas up in the mountains, they're surrounded by mountains, and they're going to catch a fair amount of precipitation, and it's going to be fresh spring water that sort of collects in pools. And so I think that, they can end up being a pretty strong place agriculturally. And they have probably a fair amount of like green grass and stuff, and it may be a little bit like colder, say, than like down in there.
Totally. They got winters. So that was kind of an idea I had for this area. So we can call that the semi-shire for now. So that was something I'd kind of thought of over the week. So
one thing that I also kind of had, I haven't like necessarily pre-planned anything, but just looking at the map, this area here, which is going to be to the south of the big river delta trade empire, I kind of picture it being for like a big portion of its landmass being pretty like plainsy, open fieldy, borderline like Mongolian-esque.
Okay.
And somewhere maybe that does similarly to Mongolia deal with a lot of like horses.
Yeah.
And maybe they can even be like semi-nomadic or something like that. But I think that seeing this big expanse, you know, you got the base of the mountains over here, but other than that, it kind of just opens to the sea around them, and they've got all this space. I think that that's a pretty great place to put space. Yeah. You know, just a lot of open space. And so they maybe have, you know, some population centers, but other than that, just a lot of fields.
Yeah, that could be interesting as well. One thing I was kind of thinking of, because we have these sort of semi-borders set up, but I was thinking specifically like why this one in particular, and I had sort of had the idea that I was thinking of maybe putting a river that that actually kind of comes in between these places as well, because it adds a somewhat natural natural landmark as well.
I think that these two probably have some level of like clashing ideas fundamentally and stuff like that, but I don't picture them as being particularly hostile to each other. So I don't think that like these borders are reinforced by ages of war. I think that it would kind of make sense for them to have some sort of split that they can more or less at least agree on.
Yeah, totally. Although, like, looking at the map, if we want to put a delta here and the mountain ranges here, you can have the river be a little sort of swoopy, but I don't think it would come all the way around here and then back. Yeah. So we might have something that sort of forms here and then maybe turns back around, like anywhere in between here and here. If it's gonna come out as a delta here, it might not be what we want to actually separate these places.
So what other geological or geographical features are we left with that can provide some kind of barrier? We've got also things like thick forests. You know, this could be a very wooded area, and that kind of creates a little bit of a natural barrier as well.
Yeah, that could be an interesting idea to have a level of forest in between, like maybe this sort of triangle in this sort of area. Yeah, that would provide exactly what you need. There's also of trying to avoid like cliffs or mountain ranges in this one's case. So yeah, probably forest might be sort of the best area.
Because I mean, really nothing other than imagination vibes. But I do picture this portion, like this region here, this nation, as being fairly wooded. I don't know what it was that put that into my brain, but it just screams to me that a lot of this may be occupied by forest.
Yeah, totally.
Whereas this border between these two nations here, I kind of don't really think that it's maybe super solid or maybe even all that enforced. It's just that if this is not much more than hella fields, and these people are like, we're doing good. We've got all the space, because that's a lot of space. Like in the grand scheme of things, that's a large area. And so, you know, if they're not struggling to contain their population or anything like that, there's no real benefit to this. Not to mention that surely they're probably not pushovers. So they're not gonna fight for it, test their luck or whatever. It's just it is what it is. Like you don't need to expand there. And these people, they've also got all the space they would ever need. And like maybe they, being partially nomadic, don't really care about the border. They just like that this is sort of a geographically, it works for them. And then as it maybe gets a little bit more, I don't know if we ever decided if this was going to be like semi-desertous or not.
We were toying with the idea, but I think we had decided initially to scrap that idea because we had moved the desert over here, and so we're like, okay, we don't need it to be like that. This area being heavily wooded gives me the impression that it could be interesting if this is sort of an elf sort of civilization. This could be sort of a human sort of center, although yeah, you see all kinds here. And then we've got dwarf and sort of human up here. And we haven't had really any place for elves. And elves are a weird one because it's like they're so in tune with nature. Like there's different types of elves, and they sort of clash with each other in certain ways, but not in others. Like wood elves are very of the forest, and high elves are very magical. But I'm like, also high elves are still sort of associated with nature in a way as well. And so what's the problem there? And there's also like, well, there's huge elf civilizations, but they're just in the forest. And I'm like, okay, so how do you have a city and a forest together? And so I think that's a good opportunity here. If we have a heavily wooded area, one of the reasons it could be heavily wooded and not cut down just over time
they
is
inherently respect and want to encourage nature.
Yeah, exactly. And so it gives us a good opportunity. And then also there's fundamental differences between these places and why they don't necessarily why they have a border, but also they don't necessarily have to be hostile to each other for the fact that they're kind of respecting each other's space, at least at the moment. So having a sort of elf civilization in like this sort of heavily wooded land here, I think is cool. Now moving down, since we've established sort of a D&D race sort of division here, and sort of dwarves and halflings and humans and elves, sort of what's left of the basic ones. There's orcs.
There's a handful in the base level book that kind of probably everybody's picturing orcs being the primary one. You've got the DLC expansion ones, but orcs I think go very, very hand in hand with fantasy. Typically the reaction is first off, that orcs bad. I don't really care for that. I like to subvert that at least a little bit. And also kind of in my brain, orcs colder. So my brain says maybe they're not on that continent, maybe they are up here somewhere in that zone. And also, mind you, we do have 3 more continents.
Absolutely.
So they can definitely still have a home, but nowhere strongly on this continent speaks to me as being I want that to be Orcville.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I mean, we could do the swamp. That could just be like goblin, orc, that sort of stuff territory. Sort of what had popped into my head with that idea is that maybe, because like you said, you like to subvert that to some degree, and it could sort of be interesting if this is sort of the homeland of that sort of thing. But this area over here, you have nomadic and like semi-peaceful orcs that, but also that's the thing. You said like they don't really get fucked with either, and that's maybe because like in a sort of Mongolian Empire sort of way, like they have their strong bands of like horsemen and warriors that wander around and stuff like that within that space. And so there's virtually no incentive to go here because there's not a lot of resources that they want to conquer, and it would be costly to try and take anything anyway. That popped into my head, although we don't need to do that. It's just something I had thought of when I was like, okay, so we have all these different races here, so should we start considering where to put the others?
Well, rather than just assuming that anywhere that is unspecified is human, I don't mind the idea for sure of there being like roving nomadic orc people. Do you think that there are strictly orcs? Do you think that there are orcs and humans and others? Do you think they mix? Do you think that they get along fair enough but kind of keep to their own and maybe have different semi-permanent or permanent population centers that are kind of peaceful but maybe not like the same entity, right? Kind of keep to themselves type of thing, because I think I kind of like that. Peaceful enough, friendly enough, like they'll work together but are distinct from each other, not the same entity or nation or something like that. Maybe this isn't even one specific nation.
Yeah, that's not a bad point either. It could sort of be this no man's land. This could be the area in between here and here. And so, like, we kind of called this frontier. And when I say frontier up here, I mean it's like it's fucking difficult to cross. It's some Oregon Trail level shit. And you might kind of get the same thing down here, but not. It's not the terrain that's pushed people to not be able to work there. It's just the fact that there's kind of nothing there and no one's really staked claim, and it is this sort of 50-50 area in between what would be like the stereotypical sort of orc and goblinoid place where no one really wants to be, and actual human civilization. And so, yeah, it might be sort of interesting if this is an area where it's like you don't have a country, but you have towns. And you can have this sort of gradient in between, like the orc, like you might still encounter a lot of tough, rough and tumble types around here, but then as you gradually make your way closer to here or towards the coast, it's just people trying to make it by and stake their claim and do their thing. And
I think for me, I'm kind of backtracking in what I like the most for that.
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I do think I kind of want it to be a, maybe not perfectly homogenous, but like one nation, you know, with a name, one banner or whatever, but maybe that most of the actual power itself is held in these population centers, these towns, these cities. And there's far more expanse than any one of these things really has claim to, but it's like it's all still one thing, just it's kind of broken down like a little bit more like decentralized power, I guess, really. But they're all, you know, this is this nation, and like all of this space is more or less like this nation, even though maybe the borders are a little bit willy-nilly, but that it's not like, oh, we've got people here, or whatever to defend our borders and our whatever. Maybe it's kind of more just like,
it's definitely not like a kingdom. But well, it's sort of like the Wild West a little bit in that sort of respect. It's like, well, you're in America, but also, like, I haven't seen a government building for the past 500,000 miles. The borders are technically within that sort of area, but then again, like, you go far enough away from any of these population centers, and you're kind of free to do whatever you want.
So that also to me kind of screams that like maybe they're not incredibly focused on permanent buildings, permanent like agriculture and that kind of thing. Maybe they're roving more in search of things like these herds of roaming large like animals that they eat, like like the buffalo or sheep or something like that. Maybe they kind of go out and live sort of following these migrations or something like that. At least, you know, some portions of the population, and there's probably still city centers and stuff too that have farms. But maybe they kind of follow that, and so that's why kind of like the power's a little bit more decentralized. The borders are a little bit more willy-nilly, because hey, if you know they're hunting for food and this pack of creatures that they're trying to eat this month or whatever crosses the border, then they're like, yeah, we're going there, like, you know, we're not worried about it. And you know, this large country up to the north probably also not terribly worried, because they know they're not here to raise our village to the ground. You know, they're just after, you know, these woolly mammoths or whatever, right?
Totally.
So I kind of like the idea that it's a little bit more fluid in its structure and culture than in maybe a typical monarchy or something like that. I kind of like that.
Are we thinking like sort of like they probably more have like tribes sort of thing?
Maybe. I do think that there should still be like large, maybe not like cities, like stone street cities, but like large gatherings of you haven't seen Game of Thrones, eh?
No.
I'm trying to think of something. For anybody who has seen Game of Thrones, I'm almost picturing like the Dothraki Sea. Maybe we pop an image up.
I kind of know what you're
kind of know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Just very, very open, and the population moves, and maybe it's large tent cities rather than stone buildings that are permanent. I do think that maybe for the heads of the clans or heads of the whatever, would probably want some place, or like, you know, the like older folk or whatever that aren't maybe able to be moving around all the time have some kind of permanent settlement, and maybe that can be where some level of law and order or whatever is maintained, but then maybe a large population is just moving around and creating these temporary areas where their food or whatever is, and they live in that.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the happy middle ground in between, because this is probably one of the more powerful places we've thought of, and so for it to be right beside it, an inherently nomadic people feels off to me, because if history's any indicator, these guys will just move in and take as they see fit.
What is motivating them to do it beyond violence? Because if there's nothing there other than, and there's no city to take over and say, hey, that's now ours because it's doing well. But if they have to start their own ass city, and they've already got plenty of space to do that if they see fit. I know what you're saying. I know what you're talking about. But there's nothing that screams take me to them that they don't already have within their own borders that's not going to cause a war.
Yeah. You had mentioned sort of a large livestock sort of thing, and that could be sort of the thing we can kind of cling on to, is the fact that maybe because of just large open fields, you do get like the sort of buffalo idea where it is like the hugest mammal, but we can take that and expand it like even further. So maybe you do have certain city centers along the coastline because like ability to like trade and actually move in and do stuff is easy enough, but then when you get out into the grasslands, it's actually kind of dangerous because there's you're not the biggest thing out here by any means, and so you can end up getting like sort of a dire wolf situation as well. And so
because imagine that there are tens of thousands of things like woolly mammoths, and these people are born hunters, and if anybody else were to come up from civilization, pop a tent down and be like, I want to build here, maybe they just get trampled out by 100,000 wild mammoths, but these people have the knowledge and stuff like that, and they see a horde coming that they're not prepared to hunt or intimidate and reroute or whatever, and they pick up their tent city and they skedaddle on over 2 days west or something like that. Right?
Okay, that could I'm starting to get a pretty decent idea on what we're sort of thinking on that.
I love the idea of like megafauna, right?
Like,
totally big creatures, and maybe not everything there is huge or anything like that, but the idea that it's just so like uncivilized, like unbuilt up,
undeveloped,
that like this is still an area where these things naturally roam and haven't been messed with, and so they've got thousands and thousands of years of like evolution build up and stuff like that too. So these people are able to live either like coinciding or at least know how to live around them.
I kind of like that as an idea. Definitely the like someone from the Delta City sort of makes his way down there, and they look at him like, oh, you're a city boy, like just like you don't get how things are here, you don't understand the rules, because like if you see a large cloud in the distance, it might not be a cloud, it very well could be a stampede, and you better make sure you're not in the way. And so these people being way more in tune with the land and nature is kind of a cool idea, but also their ancient practices being the only thing that also can keep anyone alive in this sort of area, despite again it's not the land, it's the beasts that make the place actually scary. And like with creatures sort of sprouting from the land into these large herds, it's sort of like the mountainous energy sort of creating the griffins. It's like the same thing over here with like basically behemoth sized like bison and other stuff like that. So that's a cool idea. That gives us
a little bit of an identity for that place.
Exactly. So that's cool. And we also kind of established that this is a heavily forested area. We could even move some of the inspiration from like Fae stuff from here over to here.
Sure.
Or even just do both.
Yeah, I think that I still really like the idea of pixies, fairies, leprechauns, and stuff like that.
All the small stuff.
Yeah, something that they, if not real and tangible, is sort of a part of their like beliefs or their stories and stuff like that. But other than that, it's a peaceful home for, you know, the smaller, gentle kinds of people, and the people that just want to work on their craft, and you know what I mean, be left out of your economics and your wars and your whatever. Like, I'm gonna go harvest some wheat and build something
and have 6 meals a day.
Yeah,
exactly. And to have second breakfast and all that jazz.
Smoke my pipe weed.
Yeah.
It was pipe weed, right?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Wizard weed. Yeah.
So yeah, that pretty well covers everywhere we sort of have in here. We do have a little bit of blank space over here, because I know we have our sort of magical rift or item or whatever that's
Hear me
here.
out.
Okay.
I had an idea about this.
Okay.
Right before we started filming.
Okay.
What if, because this is some sort of like rift or entity or something like that is somehow creating magical energy, harnessing magical energy, who knows, and somehow creating these Leviathan type creatures. What if it was, and this is just an idea, it's just spitballing, radiation or radiation adjacent, and so people that live too closely or spend too much time close to this thing start shifting or mutating or becoming something else or having some sort of adverse effect happening.
It has this a sort of effect like radiation does, or at least cartoon radiation. That could be interesting, because immediately that makes me think of giants. Well, like, if everything is being made bigger, then the people who live close to here, if they get bigger, they're giants. And sort of similar to the town in Destera, maybe we can change giants from a creature to a type of people, just for like functionality's sake. But you could have maybe tribes of giants up here as well. One thing I also did kind of think I wanted to do with this area is to have it be weirdly diverse biome wise as well. Like something that made it slightly unique gets enhanced, but like when you do that frequently and in smaller places, it's a lot of places competing up against each other. So I like the idea of this being very, very diverse in biomes. Like there's just like very quick sudden changes. Like if you don't have to walk for too long until you look like you're in a place that's very different. That was an idea that I sort of had, but I like the idea that it's sort of it is inherently just changing the stuff that it's given. It's not spawning it.
And also potentially just amplifying things that you would maybe typically see there. Like if you're in an area that is, we got lizards, right? We got just a lizard. Well, then like maybe you're wandering around and every 2 minutes and 15 seconds you're coming across some new fucked up type of lizard that's like 12 feet long and it's got like giant claws and you know, like just horrible mutated Fallout style, like
went from
creatures.
a gecko to a Komodo dragon.
That type of thing, as well as like, so amplifying like the wildlife as well as the geography.
Just the amplifying is kind of a cool idea. It's like, again, like if you're in close proximity and it's a field of flowers, all of a sudden it turns into like this crazy garden grove that's got incredible like biodiversity in it, or you have a like a mountain and it ends up turning into this sort of incredibly steep and craggly mountain. I like the idea that just the closer you get to whatever this is, the everything is so amplified that it's difficult for anyone to approach it.
I like the image in my mind that like this place, maybe they know at least a little bit about the nature of it, and you've got these like armed guards taking or guiding scientists in. Everybody's decked out in like medieval like hazmat suits, like plague doctor style things, and they're like escorting these scientists in, and then like this acid spitting like bat or something like that bursts out of the tree line and like decimates half of the squad, and like it's just that level of hazardous. Like they need to know more about what the hell is causing this, how do we deal with it. So they're trying to bring in scientists and stuff like that, but they need a crazy armed guard and stuff, and they're, you know,
they have a crazy armed guard who understands it's a suicide mission.
I kind of like that imagery.
Well, that kind of ties in with our sort of Leviathan hunters that we had sort of down in the city states. Like they're always competing to try and get more magical stuff, and so they just have, as well as like the people who are hunting them, they also have like scientific and magical expeditions that they keep sending in here, trying to get to whatever this is. It can have like some sort of insane mythical name, like even if they don't understand what it is, they probably have just come up with what they think it is, and they can be striving to try and approach that constantly and beat back what's there and send people into it. And also because we were also talking about how we want a lot of the city states to be unique, and so what sort of pops into my head is the idea is like, okay, well, you have say 40 city states, or just like some set of civilizations. They are sending people into the range of whatever this amplification thing is, and whoever comes back is probably amped in one way or another. And maybe even, like I said, since they send out a hunter, maybe they bring back one of these lizards, or they bring back some pieces of it, or like the poison or something like that. But now it's quote unquote irradiated in a way, and so this sort of amplification energy also applies to the city state that this is brought into, making it more amplified and unique. And this cycle continues for a lot of time, and so like the incredible diversity that's going to be happening in this area is sort of leaking into the city states as well, as they bring more of what they find back.
Jeremy came back from his expedition, his face slid off, but also now he can speak to lizards, so like that's cool.
Yeah, so that's cool. So everyone start learning lizard. We're going to be putting that, you're going to need to learn that in 4th grade.
It's going in the Rubicon.
Yeah.
Rubicon's a Jeep. Buy Jeeps.
He came back in a car and it turned into a Jeep. I guess it's amped. But yeah, so that's kind of a funny idea. Is just the idea of them slowly bringing back these things that are quote unquote like amplification radiated, and it's seeping into their civilization as well, and making each of them more unique and extreme from the others. So I like that idea as well.
I'm looking at the map here.
Yeah.
I would love to jump into the desert. The jungle, I think, also has a lot of opportunities. But I've just kind of taken a glance here and seen that we have a stretch of land up in the north.
I was just going to mention that. I'm like,
we haven't thought about really at all.
Yeah, no, exactly. We've almost ignored it entirely. I mean, honestly, we could even just stretch the idea of this sort of city-state cluster all the way over to here.
Totally. Because I do think that like that's a portion of why we haven't really looked at that, because these sort of city-states,
these borders are loosey-goosey in general, so it's hard to draw. We can't even draw anything around here, let alone what's beside it.
But we got to keep in mind that that's basically the most north of the continent, and we have mentioned that's going to be very cold, so it's probably not a densely populated area. But you said that you had some kind of idea that popped in your mind about that?
For this area? Not much really, no. Now that you mention it, the snow line is like maybe somewhere around like that sort of thing. At least for just like where, honestly, like snow will reach probably
like
down
the,
into
like
this area.
Permafrost line.
Yeah, exactly. That will probably be somewhere around here. Actually, even if it did dip a little lower, that could be cool if the actual sort of whatever the amp diamond is actually like sealed in ice in some sort of way. That could be interesting. Maybe it does just get it turns into like a sort of northern, I hesitate to say wasteland, but just like a frozen sort of area. And these city states continue up into this sort of area, but they kind of become less and less as you actually get up into that area, and then
until it's just Siberia and like nobody really wants to live there.
It's so I honestly we can just sort of extend the idea of the city-states, because we were thinking of having quite a few of them, and so giving them a little bit more space to grow is probably good. Plus, it was also kind of bothering me also that they were mostly just along this sort of coastline, and so having them stretch up inland gives them more opportunities. So,
and also a more like kind of a larger scale for them to be unique, because there's a higher shift in
you can have more space in between them,
physical space, as well as differences in like landscape and geography and temperature and stuff like that too. So
exactly. You're going from desert to frost, and so the diversity in these things is going to be cool. And I think what is going to be the process, or at least the way I think it would be the easiest, is to kind of pick sort of biome or creature type, or just a motif. To pick a motif, make an area for it here, and then have one of the city-state, like here or here, just like pick an area and have one of the city-states have taken something from there that they kind of took on as their identity, and then expand upon that, and then you have a city-state. You know, do you see what I mean?
I do.
I think that's probably going to be the process of, other than just calling this city-state area, once we actually start diving into, like, we have Cronenberg over here, and start actually drawing down these small borders and stuff like that. I think that's probably going to be the easiest way to do the process and make them unique. But that's going to be a project
for sure.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily have to dive into that yet. Although I do notice we have jungle and jungle in a sort of way. Well, this is more forest.
More forested.
This is forest, where
this is rainforest ass jungle.
Yeah, totally. Although that could be maybe another thing, is we could have also more sort of elves in this sort of area, and they can kind of communicate maybe, or have.
One thing that I also found kind of interesting about it, and I don't think that this was intentional by us necessarily, but the idea that these were Pangea, before, and then split, and then we were considering having like, it's kind of like deserty in the Delta zone.
It's tropical here,
deserty
for sure.
Up here, and then like right over this portion here, varying different kinds and levels of jungle. And if you were to have kind of a elven-y touch over here as well, maybe they are distantly related. Yeah.
Well, that could be kind of an interesting idea, is because in like sort of the modern fantasy canon, there's high elves, which are like the closer of like what you would call the material plane elves to their just fey counterparts. And then you have wood elves, who are like a little bit further, but they're more integrated into the land. And then you have, like, in D&D, there's the Eladrin, which are the fey version of those elves. We could have also that sort of scaling here, where these are the elves, where like what's actually, like, they're integrated into the forest. Like, they have cities, but they're a giant tree. They're not like buildings that are nicely made out of wood and eco-friendly. Like it's very magic heavy. And then the ones that are over here are of nature, but they're a little bit more like humans in the fact that they have like cities and sort of buildings and stuff like that. And again, they try to preserve the nature around them and stuff like that, but it's not like this sort of almost magical integration, where like you might have like almost like a druid way of thinking up here.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That's kind of very like druidic and naturalist. And that also maybe, I think that there would be definitely a fair few people in there, fair few different kinds of people as well. But that there's probably a huge language barrier there, whereas like a lot of these people probably, may have their own languages as well. But probably have some kind of trade language, right? Where they make things work. But these people are pretty disconnected because they're physically disconnected by a lot of different things. But also just don't care about being in this modern society and dealing with these people on the regular.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like relations have to happen, and in order to do so, you have to have a common language that you can speak in between each other. And yeah, exactly. Whereas like you say up here, it's just they're like, we don't care. We've been separated from almost everyone else for the past hundreds of thousands of years, and we don't care to continue. We don't care to change that. So that's probably a good way to think about it, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of at least gives us a just each area has a something. Each area at least has a little something to it, which honestly I think is going to help with when we actually do zoom in, because now at least we know what are the interactions with each place around it or anywhere else it might be able to touch. So that's pretty good. Looking at the time, it might be good for us to hit up our intermission. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Grab some snacks. We'll be right back. Welcome to the intermission. This is a chance where in the future we will hopefully be answering questions or comments that you would leave here on YouTube or on Instagram or something like that. So feel free to slide in our DMs and we will talk about them here. We'll discuss what you have to say. Speaking of, go follow us on our Instagram. Follow us on our YouTube and our Spotify. We'll be posting there every Saturday, and otherwise intermittently on our Instagram for fun little things or important information.
Thanks. Yo, welcome back.
So I think what we're probably going to focus on for the rest of this episode here is filling in the map with some specific geographical features.
Yeah, I mean, you basically just got to start throwing in the rivers, the lakes, all the other stuff like that. And so yeah, it's probably not a bad idea to just kind of...
We got the big old landmark ones, you know, the actual like outline of the continent. We got the mountain range. Those things are the significant ones that you got to start with. Other than that, forests can kind of go where you need them. There's some places that make more sense for them to be, but they can be anywhere.
Realistically, forests are probably going to be almost everywhere, but unless it's a type of biome that just literally doesn't support it. But you can just put a country down, and then after you're done, you're like, okay, I'll put a little forest here, and then a little forest there. So a lot of, like, when it comes down to wooded areas, it's easy enough to fill in, just use them to fill in the blanks. We were going to start focusing, for the most part, in this sort of area, just at least to start off with. We got Delta. We need a river. We need a river. And we have plenty of mountain range to start drawing water source from. But where are we gonna put it? Like, I mean, the border is kind of a good place to have it. At least just for like maybe that sort of area. And then there might even be more that kind of connect with it, or it could. Oh, that would be even more interesting, actually. I think if the river actually ran from like quite a far ways up from here.
Totally.
Like it started in the Dragon Mountain country and then actually came out there.
And we were also talking about how up in this nation here, it's going to be kind of like almost a ramp down as you go around these mountains, and all of that water is going to run off of that one way or the other. Some of it's going to be out to the sea and all that. But some of it is going to make its way down.
It might be kind of interesting to just have, because we're talking about the west half of the Dragon Mountains being at a higher elevation than the east half. It kind of could be just an interesting thing to have a river that honestly like kind of runs throughout the country. It would be a very, very important river at that point. And then as it kind of comes down, it's maximum size at Delta. And it also can kind of create almost like a little sort of form of tension between the countries. It's like, well, it's kind of our river, but it ends down there, and so both countries are kind of proud of the same landmark and adopt it for themselves a little bit. That's a little bit more of a cultural thing, but I think having sort of a main river that maybe sort of comes down, starts here, and we were thinking of having the capital here as well, so it could be sort of around where the river actually starts, and it's just a small river then, but it grows into this sort of gigantic one by the end. What do you think of that?
So I think that when I picture a big river like that, I assume there's probably a couple of basins where it empties into before spilling over and continuing on.
Okay.
So there's probably a handful of lakes, or like a really big lake or something like that. How do you feel about making, let's say, because if we are going to start, and
this
there will
general
be
area.
Also little streams that add into it and everything.
Well, that's
But
kind of what I was
starting
thinking
over
too,
here-
because like you'll get small rivers that come from the mountains and just flow into it anyway. And so yeah, that's why I like the idea of like a long river that almost kind of collects a lot of the water from almost the entire country or the entire mountain range, but it just builds up over time.
So what do you think about if it's going to start over here and kind of run the course, like near the mountains and snaking around the land? Some like fairly large lake basin here in sort of this nestle area of the mountain.
Yeah, that could be an interesting one. Yeah, we could have that. Yeah, sort of there. I think we're probably gonna have more pooling at this side, but yeah, having that maybe exactly here. Maybe it kind of comes down there. Spills out. Maybe, how many do we want to necessarily
Lakes?
have? Yeah, exactly.
Well,
like
little ones don't
map
necessarily-
relevant lakes.
Yeah. Little ones don't necessarily have to be added on the map, and same with like the little streams and stuff like that all add into a river. You don't need to mark down every single one. There's going to be a lot of them, but major sources and major lakes. Major lakes. Let's say. Well, do you want to have a big one? Maybe at the border.
That had crossed my mind. I also do start to think like having the closer to the delta we get, I feel like the less likely a lake is going to form, because there's going to be more water that's punching its way through the landscape. And so I feel, now that I think about it, the lakes will probably, I initially thought down here, but I think as the water's slower moving, it's probably going to pool more on this side. So yeah, maybe we have it start to pool here, and then after a while, like it just kind of, it gets stronger and to the point where like it's the main thing. So yeah, we could have this one here. This could also be just a very lake heavy sort of landscape, which could be interesting, where you have like many sort of lakes and pools and stuff like that. So we could have that, and then maybe something here, and like maybe another one up here or something.
Let's put a guy up here, shall we?
Here we go. And yeah, so this main river can probably make its way through these ones, and then I think after this point it probably should just continue.
And I do think that there's gonna be multiple more, but they don't have to be big map relevant ones.
Yeah, well, so I'm picturing like a lot of small lakes in this sort of area. Yeah. It's probably like a level of a plateau. This area is probably like higher elevation but pretty flat, and so I picture a lot of stuff pooling in this area, but then the as it starts to overflow, this river takes on the bulk of that. Like, there are probably smaller rivers at a slightly higher elevation that all drain into these three primary ones, and then that makes its way down. So let's have sort of more squiggles the better. You want to take over from here?
Yeah. Let's bring it in.
She's an innie. All right. This is something that I had to nail into my brain when like kind of just drawing rivers onto your map, is because just because water flows downward doesn't mean it can't do kind of an S curve up and then back down on your map, because I don't know, it was something that sort of happened to me while I was trying to draw at least one of the rivers on my world I was trying to draw. I hesitated to make it on the map move north on the map, because it felt like it should always be going down. But it's like, yeah, but down elevation is
Not
different
as
than
yeah.
exactly. So it just was it was something that got hitched in my head. So if there's something like that happening to you, just kind of step back for a second and remember it's okay. I can make my rivers go. They can double back on themselves. Water often takes the path of least resistance, but it doesn't always take the quickest route. So just always kind of keep that in mind when it comes down to your rivers and stuff and placing them on your map.
So a couple of things here. Number one, I think that this is probably going to end up being the big river that kind of the other ones end up joining into. But this is an enormous river.
Yeah.
And then another thing is I kind of merged it up with even just not necessarily that long, but briefly along with
On
the border.
Yeah, that
so
would
that
make
the
sense.
river matches the border. Not that for the entire way. How they figure out the rest of this is up to us in a moment. But that's what I got for the shape here.
Well, it does kind of geographically make sense, because we are going to have a path like kind of up through the mountains this way. So you have this path, which is kind of its own little area there. And then a lot of this area is kind of blocked off by the river. And so it does actually make sense for a border to be there, just because there's the path and the way the river goes kind of just makes it like an easy place for people to be like, yeah, let's call it there. So yeah, definitely good idea, I think.
And then this section of the border, if we want to keep that section of the border, is kind of where their border was, and then drawn out to the nearest section of sea.
Yeah, totally. That would make
the
sense.
nearest point. And then it widens a little bit into both countries.
Yeah, so there we go. So that's a nice, very major river. And major rivers are always very important. And so I think it'll just be geographically interesting to have one that's that long. And the more extreme the geological features, the more cool in fantasy it seems. So that's cool. So now Delta is actually a delta and not just what we're calling it.
Well, let's go ahead and toss ourselves in a couple of more rivers that join it, shall we?
Absolutely.
Let's just go ahead and give ourselves...
What if we had one that kind of...
100%. Treat yourself to a river.
There we go. That's a little fucky. I don't like that.
Too close?
Too close.
Over time, that is kind of true. If two rivers get very, very close, over time they will join.
Yeah, they'll just...
Because they're both going to eat away at the walls and break it down and become one river.
There we go. So that's pretty good. Do we want to have one that kind of comes from over here? Because it's not a mountain range, but...
Well, I think, one other thing is there's going to be rivers all over the place that just run out to the sea. So wherever kind of feels right, just toss in a river.
Yeah, I kind of actually like that as well. Where, yeah, this is gonna kind of be interesting, because this creates almost sort of a border for the primary Delta city to have to almost kind of stay within. And then in order to get to the Dragon Pass, there is sort of you're gonna have to have a bridge here, which is probably going to have a town surrounding it. and then make its way up that way. So and it's definitely got like a very land of rivers sort of feeling down here, which is kind of cool. I think I want to have another river in here somewhere.
When in doubt, toss in a lake. So we got a big old lake that acts as a reservoir, and then as it overflows, where does that lead?
Yeah.
Draw your thing.
So we're considering this. We know it's a dragon. Should it be marked on the map as a volcano?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a volcano, right? Or
yeah, I guess we were.
The people of the world who would have drawn this map, do they think that it's a volcano?
I mean, Delta appears to be kind of the main character city in a way, just at least when it comes down to development and like just being a center for multiple cultures, and also being a naval city, which means it would probably cartography would be something they'd be into.
So do you think that, some regular, well-learned but regular folk would see it and perceive a volcano?
It could.
Does it smoke? Does it smolder? Does it spill over lava? Or is it just kind of, if you know type situation?
Well, I know I was kind of thinking this originally, but like the civilization that was going to be there was going to be kind of in front of the dragon's mouth. And so it wouldn't make a lot of sense for it to smoke or to actually spew lava or fire at any point, because the civilization is sitting point blank at the mouth.
Yeah.
But what I was sort of thinking is that could be sort of a misconception that the Delta civilization sort of considers, whereas like the people who actually live in the country next, it could be like a sort of source of contention. Like, oh no, it's the dragon god, and they're like, it's a mountain, or it's a volcano. Like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Like, just kind of this disrespect for the other culture.
It's also very cool, like, just on a map to see like that as, a point of interest on there, for us in our head to recognize what that is. A volcano is a very good point of interest on a map. So if you want to draw up a little volcano pointer there, then absolutely.
Perfect.
So speaking of rivers, I kind of envision the swampy area just being an absolute nightmare of rivers.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, a lot of it's going to be like it's just going to be just water.
Yeah.
You're not gonna.
Do you even want to?
Well, like this is the thing, is like it almost feels irrelevant because there's going to be many areas where water's kind of just moving from one little area to the other, but it's so abundant that it's kind of not worth diving into, because you're just going to be micromanaging it at that point. You know what I mean?
What about large bodies of water that would make it onto the map?
It would be kind of cool to have just, well, I mean, you guys have dealt with a large black sludgy body of waters right now. It's definitely an interesting piece. Yeah, it could be interesting to maybe just put down some sort of large body of water and maybe just come up with what the deal is, like what the full deal with is later. So maybe we'll just a little thing like that.
There she is. Beautiful. All right. So what do we think now? What do you think? Any other significant rivers, lakes? Or should we move on to trees?
I think trees is definitely going to be where we're at, because yeah, we have our main river here. I think almost anything that's going to be here is basically going to be a creek at best.
Yeah, exactly.
At the semi-shire.
And, non-bothersome,
And we have a few major rivers here, a high density here, but I feel like having an area that has that is interesting. But major rivers that aren't just going to be something that would be on a local map. I think we've kind of covered it on here at least.
Side of the pond.
Yeah, so I know, like, we want this area to be sort of wooded, so we can just kind of fill that in.
Yeah, is there anything you want to mark specifically, like as forest, or just kind of an outline?
I think this area specifically is going to be mostly, it's just mostly forest. But I think that's because of the civilization that kind of lives within it. It's constantly cultivating the nature in it, and so they don't have a lot of separate forests because they just, rather than like a human civilization that would constantly cut down the trees and separate a forest, I feel like it's going to have the opposite effect, where they're constantly trying to cultivate them and connect them.
So, what do you think? Because I feel like there's not going to be only trees in this section on this whole continent.
Oh, no.
You want to spread out a couple more?
That's its own forest for sure. We wanted this to be kind of open grassland.
Pretty open grassland, and I don't think that means that there can't be forests. You know, I think that if there's forest, like, let's just go ahead and give big old forest taking up maybe, actually, let's call it kind of a portion of this entire section here.
Honestly, I almost kind of like it being a lot of this sort of in between the river area here. It gives kind of a no man's land in between this area and this area, and so it limits Delta's ability to actually get in here. Like we were saying as well, it's sort of like they don't move in here because they also don't like to fuck with this area. This forest probably being a decent part of it, and so it's kind of the border's halfway in between, but realistically, like, no one kind of has claim on it. So it could be interesting to have the forest sort of be like, no one really screws with this side of the river, and so having it be a decent chunk of that area that just goes up against the mountains could be interesting, I think. And then it's kind of its own little area, and it could be almost a sort of could be even sort of a mystical forest in a way.
I'm gonna extend it to the sea on this side.
That's actually a good idea.
To separate a little bit more from this as well. Yeah.
Well, also consider, so thinking of it in an I'm an adventurer exploring this map sort of thing. You have a quest in Delta, and they're like, oh, you need to go collect something from the horrible swamplands beyond the mountains. And it's like, okay, well, what's the fastest way there? Well, realistically, what you have to do is you actually have to make your way through this country, through this forest, around this, follow this coast, around the mountains, and then you'll be there. And it's kind of like this. You really have to go. That's the way. That's the fastest route. But having the forest, that's kind of this buffer before you meet the swamp, and then the forest turns into the swamp as it goes, is probably, like, it's just good for transition's sake.
Yeah, 100%.
You're not going from grassland to swamp, you're going from grassland to sort of a mountainy forest, and then once you get past that area, you're into the swamp. So that's probably a good idea, I think. Yeah, definitely.
So much of this is going to be wooded. And so much that I don't think that, same with like the rivers and the streams and stuff, I don't think that it's necessary to mark it down, because that is going to be basically all of it.
Yeah. The thing about this area as well is it's so shitty. I don't think anyone's going to have mapped it out well.
Yeah, that's fair.
No cartographer will have ever crossed these lands. And so they might know about whatever this is, the Grand Bog or something like that. But realistically, like, a lot of the features it's going to be pretty consistent. It's wet, it's woody, it's gross.
Yeah.
And that's the consistency all throughout. You don't have a lot of stuff breaking it up. You might have landmarks, but you're just going to have to mark where those are. You're not going to have like, oh man, I found like these particularly different bodies of water.
Yeah.
So it's for the sake of a world map, I don't think it's going to be worth just diving into that and micromanaging it until, like, maybe if we start to, like, when we zoom into that place and we start to add, like, interesting landmarks and actual like small little clusters of civilizations and towns. Like we can do that then. Right now it doesn't make sense.
Okay. What about forests in ye olden mountain range?
I think a lot more on the top. I think, and then it turns into
stony like
hills. Yeah, it's sort of a rolling hills down here, but as you get up here, we have a lot of lakes. Like I kind of picture it as sort of similar to like in between, not to get too local here, but in between the Okanagan and Similkameen area. You got the lakes, but you've also got these the forests with the rivers in it, in that sort of area. Like I can picture that, and so I think a lot of this area is going to be wooded in a sort of way.
Yeah, I pictured it being like hugging the mountain range. Most of it is going to be like wooded with the occasional sort of clearing, and then sort of weaning out like around the corner.
This tip, so yeah, I think we could kind of consider like most of this area wooded. There's going to be like there's roads, there's clearings, but the clearings are honestly going to be more rare than the forest. And I pictured maybe this little triangle being the most populated area, so maybe it's sort of kind of avoids this area in a sort of way, but it's in between the mountains and the lakes, and in this area, and even like another little bit over here that is kind of like same thing. It's honestly probably not even going to be technically disconnected. Like it's just less trees in this area, so you wouldn't consider it wooded. And then as you get down here, it gets
less and less.
Exactly. So that's...
And I think there's still probably patches here and patches here, but
there are little forests. It's not a world. It's not a world map thing you'd want to consider.
Okay. Shall we cross
the pond? Yeah, this is gonna be a weird one.
What do you think about major bodies of water and trees in the desert?
That's an excellent idea.
I don't think we should have them.
Honestly, no, just big lake right in the middle.
Okay.
It's the Oasis Desert.
What do you think about trees in the jungle?
Yeah.
Want to have those?
No.
No?
No, I think that's actually a bad idea.
Okay.
It contradicts itself a little too much.
So we've kind of picked our paths there already with those two areas.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, we could mark a few areas where an oasis could actually be.
For sure.
Because if you have an oasis, you're probably going to have a little bit of a population around it, and so it might be interesting to place a couple of those down. But it feels you're kind of just like dropping stuff at random.
So in my opinion, I think that's probably also a very unexplored area.
Oh,
and I'm sure that those exist.
Are they mapped?
Go on the map, yeah.
Are they mapped? Yeah, probably not. No, good point. Good point.
But what do you think about major bodies of water in the jungle? Because that does seem like it would be a thing.
No, definitely. Yeah, no, that actually sounds like a cool idea. I mean, you would probably want to have a major river running through it as well, because this is like rainforest jungle. I was thinking.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we do have this mountain range here. So we could have maybe something that kind of starts up here. I honestly kind of like the idea that maybe it kind of zigzags quite a bit and actually covers quite a lot of the area. So maybe if it kind of goes like this, and then like crosses again, does like a loopy there, something like that. So it's a river that actually does supply water to a lot of the rainforest.
And by the time it makes it all the way out to the sea here, it's also going to be a very powerful and wide river, because being that this is a rainforest, there is going to be a lot of water moving around in there.
Yeah, totally.
What do you think for like lakes? You want any big old lakes in there?
Ones that would be on the map, I'm not sure. I can picture like clusters of small and deep lakes, but I'm not sure if I would have like a large greater lake here.
Speaking of Great Lakes, want a big old lake up in the frontier?
I mean, that could be a good idea. I mean, it would take up a decent amount of space. Could add it could end up being kind of a shortcut in towards the amplification zone. Like, maybe having a large lake that's kind of like somewhere in this sort of area. The fastest way to get closer to it is to just cross the lake and get right up there. But then you're also kind of in the thick of it as soon as you get off the boat.
My concern with it being too far up, because around that region makes sense to me, but being too far up, you get Arctic pretty quick up in there.
Yeah, fair enough.
But somewhere, I'm just gonna go ahead and pop one down. Why not? How does that look to you?
Looks pretty good. Could also have the river come from. Actually, that's something we were kind of thinking with the Badlands. Is it's someplace that's actually really prone to flash flooding. Depending on, it's really dry in one set of the season and really wet during the other set of the season. So having maybe another. I hesitate almost to come from the mountains again, but have one that like is connected to here, or maybe just from the mountains directly through the Badlands.
For a big old river to feed this guy?
Yeah, I want to connect it to this somehow, but I'm also like, should we? I don't know. Because if it's prone to flash flooding, then you're probably not working with still water.
I don't think that I need that one to be connected to a major river, because you will see lakes pop up just fed by small creeks and groundwater and that sort of thing. You know, rainfall is going to pool somewhere, whether there's an actual river or not. I'm happy to leave that one alone, in my opinion. And I think that kind of like for the Badlands themselves, that like being adjacent to, you know, the end of this mountain range, and you've got, you know, all of this area that a lot of it during the winter and stuff is going to be covered in snow, and like that kind of runoff being a reason why this can be prone to flash flooding, or that there's, you know, maybe a handful of small little rivers that come down but dry up or something like that, you know.
It could be fed from the mountains, but that's the thing, is like just the geography could make it volatile all the time. Like just the level of precipitation you get is so varied. You don't have a river that goes there. You wouldn't map one. There isn't one. It just
There's not
fucking
going to be
shows
a river
up
most of the time.
There's no specific area where a river is. They just show up and wash you out, and then next year the geography is different. So that's definitely fair enough.
But I do think that we should give a little bit of water to these thirsty lads over here, these city-states. You want to have... I don't necessarily want it connected to here, because I do want there to be something ominous about this, you know what I mean?
Well, this lake is probably going to be around the border where, like, the amplification of whatever this is starts to begin.
But what do you say we just go ahead and chuck a lake in the city-states? I'm just chucking things at them so that later on, when we get more specific, we can use those things to create borders, to create unique situations and stuff like that. And let's go ahead and say, I want to put some rivers, you know, one river that goes through maybe a couple of different city-states before it reaches the sea. What do you kind of think about a river in there?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Definitely.
Where does it come from? Where does it go? Where does it come from, Cotton Eye Joe? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's going to end at the sea. Do we think that, you know, ground pooling and stuff like that is enough to feed this, and then it overflows and it spills out in this river?
You could have sort of a glacial fed river that comes from the north and spills down. So maybe having something that's, because again, like you sort of have the snow line sort of here, and so maybe there is a river that kind of comes from the north this way and can
go right through it.
Do we want to have any rivers come out at the Tridents?
I would like to see one of them have a river.
Okay.
Maybe not the other two. Make that one the unique thing.
The middle.
Beautiful. Now, forest. We're gonna have some forest. We talked about having a little bit of a divide in between them. Do we want that forest for another degree of separation between the these dragon chimes and the triplet cities?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and just chuck. And then we got a big old boreal forest up here. How does that seem?
Yeah, definitely. It's like it can be a cold temperature sort of forest. Like, yeah.
At a certain point, though, you're gonna kind of stop seeing trees, and I do think that that's maybe not far. Let's widen that and shorten that instead.
Okay.
Like so, and then it'll kind of gradually taper off, sort of just below where like the brutally cold line is. How's that seem?
Yeah, totally. Honestly, I can see like
It being
just
further
being
out?
well, just the forest kind of stretching out.
Bring it, do it. Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to stop at the cities. The cities can, their backdrop could be the forest that just finds its way up there. Yeah, you have like a pine forest. It's very accustomed to the cold in general, and so it's not. Maybe it sort of slowly turns into a slightly more leafy forest as you get closer, but it's kind of the same thing. It turns into sort of a 50-50 as you get closer and closer down to the triplets. But that's just sort of the biome that they inhabit. Obviously, like that. Again, it's just like there's clearings where there's clearings and stuff like that. But I think this being a pretty heavily wooded area is probably just a good idea. And then this, you're basically, the Badlands are going to stretch in a certain amount. The forest is going to kind of meet it at a certain area, and then that will sort of happen.
I do picture that the city-states, some of them are going to be in better shape resource-wise than the others, and some of them are going to be pretty starved.
Yeah.
But I do kind of want to just, let them, like we say, there's a forest that stretches into part of it, and then we'll work out the borders afterwards, and see how they get on with the geographical differences in between them that we've created for them.
Yeah, totally.
And then up in this area, you said you kind of like the idea of it being like a geographical, like just grab bag, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
a little bit of everything. Do you want to chuck down a little spot where there's, a forest, a jungle, a giant chasm, that kind of stuff, or do you want to worry about that later on when we get a little?
I think I want to worry about that later.
Okay.
Actually, one thing I was watching through a previous episode. One thing that we never put down that we wanted to put down was your sort of moon bay.
Totally.
We never picked out where to do that, and I still want that to be a thing.
Did we put that on the other continent that we haven't actually brought out here yet?
I don't think so. I don't remember putting it down at all. I don't remember finding an area and picking it.
So, looking at the map here, how do you feel about sharing this section in the very far corner? Because I'm happy to have this section here be kind of different than the other one for whatever spiritual, religious, unknown reason.
It leaves room for almost an occult sort of interpretation of, because you wanted it to be to do with the moon in some way. You wanted it to be related to the moon. It's a bay, so like the tides are probably going to be an important sort of part of that, and that little crescent shape obviously can call out to that. And so maybe there is sort of a little island in here, in one way or another that that does that. I just remembered that, and I was like, since we have the map out, I do want that to be
before we get to, because at any stage you can adjust your map as you see fit. Like you had mentioned as well, there will come a time where you have to get rid of things that you don't really want to get rid of, but you've backed yourself into a corner. But hey, if you can figure it out earlier than later, get her done.
Well, it also is kind of cool. I kind of do like the mixing of those as well, because you can have something that's like kind of occult or like eldritch or something mysterious to do with that place. It'll be extra uber duper spooky because of the location as well. Another thing I had actually thought of that I did want to bring up before we continue on is I had an interesting idea the other day. Have you ever seen? I've seen like books and movies and stuff like that to do with this, with like the idea of globe having an inside.
Oh yeah.
And like in some, it's got its own little central sun or something
Hollow
like that.
Earth, or no, I know what you're talking about. I feel like there was what was that movie that came out in 3D and there's dinosaurs on the center of the Earth, and I feel like Brendan Fraser was in that.
That wasn't Journey to the Center of the Earth, was it?
Journey to the Center of the Earth is exactly what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I had thought of that, and it could be something maybe to do with this. Maybe what this is actually just a hole that goes down. Because we were also, if you remember when we were talking about how the beasts, in a way, being nature and the gods sort of being order in a way. It was kind of a chaos and order sort of dynamic. And so the hollow earth idea had me sort of thinking that, like, well, if they are of the earth, maybe the inside is even crazier than the outside. And so whatever's, like, there's sort of a connecting point maybe here that is spilling out into the surface world. That was just an idea I had based on this little area here. But even if we don't make it that connection, I think it could be cool to have, because D&D kind of has it with, like, the Underdark, but it's not quite the same thing. Yeah. It has its underworld, but I think the idea of it being very similar to the surface but very different because it's a whole new world could be interesting. But it's more just something I wanted to spitball and put out there before we continue. And since we're approaching the end of the episode, it'll give us a little bit of time to consider it as well and what we might be able to do with it. Not something we have to do, but I had considered over the week and just remembered. Yeah. And so wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah. That also does tie into something you were mentioning about wanting to have a mysterious hole in the middle of the desert that seemingly goes nowhere, as an endless abyss.
Yeah, I like that. I don't know why. I even
want a hole in your
that.
Planet. I get it. I get it.
Well, exactly. I had considered
There's
that
already a hole in our ozone layer.
Oh my gosh.
Mamma mia.
And well, I mean, if you're gonna have a golf course, you gotta have at least 9.
That's true.
Because I had done this in my world with sort of similar to your sort of like Crescent Bay with the island in the middle. I have the island with the hole in it, and then so I'd kind of gotten fixated on that idea, and then I mentioned it for the forest, and I'm like, oh, it could be here.
You're trying to put a hole somewhere, man.
I want something.
We'll find a place to put a hole. 100%, we'll get you a hole. But I guess. I think we're probably all right for this episode. Next time you want to, at the very beginning of the next episode, or maybe even in between takes here, we'll go ahead and start marking up some of these lines with bright, shiny colors so you can differentiate a little bit what's going on. And then I think we'll zoom into a couple of our more thought out, already fleshed out places and sort of spruce them up, liven them up with a little bit of real zoomed in culture and facts and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, after we have a semi-complete map, we can start to just get these cultures nailed down. There's a couple places we have left up in the air. Like this feels like almost final boss territory, and so we don't really need to get to it quite yet. And it's going to be so highly diverse that it's going to be a little bit of a micromanaging thing. We can get to it later. And so we'll kind of complete the map in nice felt pen so that it looks nice. Any adjustments we want we can make, or once we move it over to digital we can make that a thing. But I think we're pretty well set on a basic map, and we're going to get a little bit closer in, a little bit more intimate with our places. So thanks for watching.
Catch you in the next one.
See ya.